For my favorite sensation and perception thing, I am going to be talking about color and how infants and babies perceive color. Also, I will talk about recognition, specifically facial recognition within infants. I have always been very interested in childhood development and how infants develop their vision. As a kid, I knew that infants could see bright, basic colors like red, but I never really knew why. Being the oldest sibling and cousin in the family, I saw all of the kids you see in these pictures grow up from infancy. Let's go into the basics of how cones and rods develop at birth. Cones are not as developed at birth, and obviously most people know infants cannot see well. In around the first 3 to 4 months, color vision develops. Different wavelengths are used to test color vision and intensity. Intensity should always be adjusted because it is necessary for the colors to have the same brightness. Colors like red is more intense than yellow, so the yellow intensity would have to be increased. When testing color on infants, usually whoever is testing would present a light repeatedly for the purpose of habituation. The infant's looking time is recorded, and when a new light and stimulus is presented, the infant will most likely look longer than the previous stimulus because they saw the light so many times. Dishabituation means that the second stimulus is different to the infant from the previous habituated stimulus, and this is what causes them to look longer. Now I am going to be talking about rod development. During the habituation phase, a rod moves back and forth behind a rectangular occluder, which has to do with the object permanence. When the infant is habituating, the line behind the rectangle will look more like a formed line rather than having a space in the middle. According to some studies created by Kalman and Spelk, infants compared to 4-month-olds can see the same thing. The development to perceive the world happens rapidly over the first few months of life. Some infants achieved what is called perceptual completion and are called perceivers, and the infants who cannot are called non-perceivers. A perceiver is more fixated on the rod, and the non-perceiver fixates more on the rectangular occluder. Something that is very interesting is face perception in infants. We cannot infer that because babies cannot see well, they can't recognize things like faces and familiar objects. How close the infant is to a face is a big factor in if they can recognize it or not. Infants can perceive a face from about 2 feet away, and this does depend on lighting. Around the age of 3 and 4 months, babies can tell differences between faces and emotions showed on a face. They can see and feel if someone looks angry, happy, or neutral. Mothers and fathers have a big part in how babies develop their recognition. Around 2 days old, an infant can recognize their mother's face. Babies will focus more on the contrast of the hairline and the face. Exposure to a scene or face indicates how a baby can recognize, because in many experiments, babies will look longer at their own mother's face rather than the stranger right next to her. The maturation of faces and emotions correlates with the growth of the fusiform face area in the brain. This area continues to form into the teenage years and is located in the anterior temporal cortex. The FFA is very underdeveloped and usually becomes fully developed in adolescence. The picture on the left shows an fMRI scan of a person's increased blood flow in the FFA when asked to look and recognize faces. To conclude, infants can quickly after birth be able to recognize colors explained by tests like the habituation test, and the fusiform face area plays a big part in helping infants recognize faces like their mothers at a young age.